Felixstowe Society to welcome our Suffolk Coastal MP, Dr. Coffey. Thank you.
That kind of introduction, blimey. I've never worn one of these mics before, so forgive me. I might start throwing shapes like Madonna, because that's the only person I've seen that. It's a huge pleasure to come and speak to the Felixstowe Society, and I can see Felixstowe TV is here again. I've already seen them once today, as I had the formal opening of my office in above Poundland, basically. I've sublet an office from Beaton's, but it's a great pleasure to move the office to Felixstowe, because this town represents, probably the Trimley certainly, represents just over a third of the constituency's electorate. And yes, it's quite a small space compared to the constituency's 302 square miles. And when I grew up in Liverpool, really, I was born in Wigan, but grew up in Liverpool, and I often say to the MPs in the North West, my constituency size is larger than all of Liverpool, the Wirral, Sefton and St Helens put together, and I think Knowsley. So you're talking in terms of square mileage, a pretty big area, and they have about 15 MPs representing the same geographic, though of course not the same number of people. I think it's also a pleasure to be in the Citadel. It's I'm a Catholic. I was born and brought up a Catholic, effectively, although my great-grandmother was from Huntingdon and a huge Salvationist. And it's been quite interesting. One of my hobbies is family history. So quite often I will spend a bit of time, if I go and do the Sunday politics show for the regional, it's all recorded on a Friday afternoon in Cambridge. I'm afraid it's not live, or rarely. So I take a few hours to research that and try and understand some of the different elements of parts of East Anglia. But as has been made clear, I'm not from Suffolk born and bred, I am a blow-in, but I'd like to think after 4 years I've become somewhat suffocated. I have to say, every MP adores their constituency, but I am probably, I have several MPs come up to me and tell me how lucky I am to represent this particular area. And because a lot of them come here on holiday or have second homes. So I'm just thinking out loud, Harriet Harman has her second home in Waldringfield. Nick Robinson, the BBC political reporter, has his second home in Orford. There are so many, several people in Aldborough and so on. I must admit, I'll be honest, I haven't yet found somebody with a second home in Felixstowe yet, but I think it's just because they haven't come here when the sun is shining and there's nowhere. To be honest, it's such a fine place to sit and watch the sea, and whether that's down by the ferry, whether it's down by Manning's, frankly, it's the sun is shining. It's a great place to be. I think it's fair to say that I have been interested in politics for some time. I won't go into all my history, but I think one of the things that I think motivates people to become involved in politics is either they have seen something which they didn't like and want to do something about it, so kind of going against the status quo, or indeed saying, well, I think this is something we need to do. I must admit, I'm from the former, that I realised politics and politicians mattered the day that my parents, who were both teachers in Liverpool City Council, back in 1985, when they received their redundancy notices, as did every other employee of Liverpool City Council, when it happened to be being run by somebody called Derek Hatton. And I was thinking, my word, my parents have been made redundant. And during the 80s, people, of course, there were many places which went through elements of recession and so on. But parents being teachers, and my mum said, don't worry, darling, we're all being re-employed in 3 days' time. It's some whatever. And I just thought that wasn't a very good way to run my home city, very proud city. And that's what triggered my involvement in qualities which I think a good member of Parliament needs to have, is tenacity. And I showed some tenacity in getting elected, but that is an important part of not just taking no for an answer. And nothing's more infuriating than a computer says no. But I think another thing about being a member of Parliament is in that way is also working out which battles you can win, so recognising you might not be able to win everything, but also the way you go about your battles. And I suppose a good example would be how I involved myself in the A14 campaign. And for a long time, there was quite a lot going back and forth between the Department for Transport, nothing too much being said in the local media. And in the end, let's be open about it, I initially failed, because I had not persuaded the Department for Transport to take out the tolling proposal until it came to consultation. And it'd been quite a lonely battle. My neighbour Ben Gunner had been helpful, but how can I put it? MPs are also looking after their own bits. So there's a little bit of a worry, if we help you on this, that means we won't get that. And so that can be a bit of a challenge. But it was very useful in the consultation process to then galvanise our local Chamber of Commerce when it became a real threat. And also our petition, which I hope some of you signed, I don't know if you did. Thank you if you did. But also using that trump card with slightly pulling my question to the Prime Minister without trying to put him on the spot for a 30-second Q&A response, which would have got me the same response that he would give all the time, to making sure that turned into a 30-minute meeting with the Prime Minister, and going through in detail, not too much detail because he'll get bored quite quickly, but really getting to the point of why it was a bad idea. And I think it's that sometimes that tenacious, but being polite, being careful, not being a bit of a nutter or a headbanger or just out to cause trouble, but to really put across in a convincing way why this is the wrong thing to do. Now, in contrast, I think what's also been quite interesting, I never thought I'd get involved in health issues. And given that Dr. Daniel Poulter was elected next door, and though I am called Dr. Coffey, I do use the title, but I'm a PhD in chemistry, nothing to do with medicine at all. So I naturally deferred to Dr. Dan, who'd already done work with Ben Gunner and others about the cardiac unit at Ipswich. But I think it was casework that came to me, of people waiting hours, somebody dying the day after having waited 4 or 5 hours for an ambulance. Or the issue at the other end of the constituency, this shows you how far it goes. I go parallel with Kessingland. And I was told by a councillor today the distance between one end of my constituency to the other is the same as between London and Brighton, to give a sense of perspective. Was about patients who were going into James Paget Hospital at the time were not being treated consistently, I think is the best way of putting it. About to fail their third CQC, I called in a debate for the chairman of that hospital to go, knowing that that would also trigger the chief executive. But it was pretty grim for a week. It was like I was the person who hated the NHS, who thought everybody was terrible, not doing perhaps just trying to destroy it, as opposed to eventually, fortunately for me, the local media were happy to say that I was the person who was standing up for patients and recognising it was quality of treatment and care that mattered, rather than trying to get that people try to hide away under the statistics. We've hit our targets, aren't we great? When actually you know that across the east of England they were brilliant at hitting their targets if you lived in a main urban centre. But if you happen to live even just a couple of miles outside a main urban centre, if you had broken your hip and there was no chance of them picking you up within the 19-minute target, well, then you just went to the bottom of the pile because you weren't going to die. And it was that kind of approach that was quite shocking to me. And yet, when I met the chairman, when I met members of the board, all they kept saying was, well, we've hit our targets and life is very difficult. And I appreciate this is where the public loses their temper with the government. You know, you get paid a lot of money, you've got the power, fix it. You know, we don't want to hear excuses. And I suppose to some extent, it's quite interesting, nobody ever really approached me. It wasn't the same sense as the A14. Only a handful of people approached me, but by doing that I was able to lift the lid, start doing freedom of information requests, start digging down, and that's where we uncovered this whole, as I say, target-driven culture and it's still 3 or 4 years on, we're still only at base camp in trying to turn the ambulance around, but nevertheless it will be one of my proudest achievements that we've managed to get rid of the entire board of the Ambulance Trust. And I'm not pretending it's easy for the people who've replaced them, but I will give them my support as long as they keep focused on patients. Also, epitomises that for me is education in Suffolk. And coming as an outsider again, I think that was one of the things that really struck me. Very low unemployment. And yes, I kept being told that people don't have aspiration. Well, I don't believe that. When you go into primary schools, these children want to be astronauts, they want to be doctors. And something doesn't seem to happen once they go along there. And I remember speaking to the editor of the East Anglian, Terry Hunt. I said, one of my challenges, problems about Suffolk at the time, you've been so ignored over the years, you've kind of looked after yourselves, which is great. You're used to becoming self-sufficient. And there is low unemployment. But this could be so much better. I said the issue is that for me, and I'd be interested to get some feedback from people who've been in Suffolk a long time or born and bred, is that there's almost an attitude if it's good enough. And my concern is that it ends up actually being second class, if not third rate. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps coming in with an external perspective, one of the reasons why we as MPs in particular are really giving the County Council a hard time about the attainment levels in education. Because I really want our children to be prosperous. I recognise a lot of people come to Suffolk to retire. Over a quarter of the constituents in Suffolk Coastal are over the age of 65. And but there is so much skilled work out there, and companies locally are begging for hiring skilled workers. And I really, really want the children of this county to be the ones who are the future BT engineers, creating whatever is next in fibre optic. I want them to be the people helping to build Sizewell C and to run it. And I use an extremity in this. I try and say, I don't want our children only to be aspiring to cut the hair of the construction workers or make the sandwiches for them. We need people with talent to do that and a passion to do that, but not to be the limit of their passions. So I'm painting, not intentionally, perhaps a little bit of a bleak picture, because actually Suffolk, as you all know, is a very special place. We have wonderful arts, we have wonderful weather, great farming, wonderful countryside. The port continues to grow and is a magnet for a lot of investment, as indeed are other things. And I suppose other things that I could witter on about, but I will get back to what I do in Parliament in a moment rather than just going on about Suffolk Coastal. But I do hope that it's evident that the MPs of Suffolk, or largely the MPs of Suffolk, are working together to try and get improvements on railways, trying to get improvements on broadband. On a Wednesday, the chamber opens at 8 to do this. On Wednesday mornings there'll be quite a queue. And for the budget day, there's a particularly even bigger queue to get in, so that people can either get their bits where they're going to be on telly or their favourite seat or whatever. Sitting behind the Prime Minister goes down very well. I remember sitting behind him the very first day Parliament sat, and my stomach is now famous. So.